Today, I wanted to focus on offline first, and then in order to cover offline first, we will also look into PWAs. Um, I've prepared a demo where we could see um, all of these concepts in action. So yeah, let's start. So here, first slide, it's my name, which is Gerard Sanz, and I'm a developer evangelist. And maybe some of you don't know what that means, but I think it's just getting excited about technology and talking about it. My background is mainly Angular. I'm an Angular Google developer expert, but you can also see me doing Vue and React. So depending on the talk. These are some of the places where I speak. So you can see I've been all over the place. I think this is my sixth year now, so I'm pretty comfortable with these talks. Um, I'm now working on a serverless training. So basically, I've been focused on front end, but in the last 2 years, I've also covered cloud. So this is a training that I'm working with Yang Kui. Um, he's a AWS serverless expert, and we are building this Twitter clone using all the technologies that you can see, and you can go check it out if you ever go and want to learn about serverless and the cloud. This is an excellent resource, and it's using Vue. I mean, I hope there are no extremists here, so I use Vue as well sometimes. All right, so let's go into the topic, and I think the first question that I want to cover is what is offline first, and as web developers, we don't face that question that often, and this I understand can be a little bit less familiar to some of you. So I'm going to focus a little bit on this, and I think the first thing that you want to avoid when you are developing an offline first app is exactly this, which is the dinosaur. I don't know if you have seen this game. So whenever you are offline, you can press the space bar and you can play this game while in Chrome. So I mean, if you have invested your time building your offline app, of course, you don't want your users to be playing the dinosaur game, no? I mean, that would be silly. So one of the first things that we will be looking at is how you can make your app offline first. And of course, you can also do this for mobile, but we are going to focus on web. The first thing we want to do is avoid the dinosaur. So we will be looking at ways of how we can avoid that screen. And some people, the way they approach this is, okay, we are going to use a placeholder. So whenever the user goes offline, we are going to show something that will be working as a placeholder, something like, okay, we are offline whenever you go online. If you go on the underground, something like that, just make sure you get back online, and then you can keep operating with our app. But of course, that's not good enough. So the next thing that we want to look at is how we can improve the user experience. We want our users to be able not only to know if they are online and offline, but while they are offline, we want them to be able to still operate the app. And that means that we will have to be providing some kind of features that will help to do that. And besides web, we need to start thinking about what native like features we can start adding to our app. And progressive web apps will be playing a big role here. And we will look at how progressive web apps can add these native like features. So this will be closer to a mobile app that you use in your phone. And when we are looking at this, we will realize very soon that if we want the user to work offline, we need some way to store what the user have done. So imagine if we are dealing with an application that the user can create data, we need to be able to store the data and also to synchronize the data when the user goes back online. So we also need a reliable storage. And when we are looking at offline first, we want to focus on each of these aspects. And these are the things that I would look into. So, okay, so that's the first section there. And I like to use these funny cat pictures. So that's the end of a section. And we are ready to go for the next one. And the next thing I want to cover is progressive web apps. And progressive web apps have been around for a while now. Maybe you have heard about them. And we are going to cover, all the details. If you want to consider your app as a PWA, it needs to follow these core requirements, and there are a few of them. The first one is it needs to be running on HTTPS. So if you plan to build a PWA, you need a place to host your app using HTTPS. And that is because the way PWAs work, and also because you are sharing the user's data, you want to keep this data secure. And this will apply to all of the assets, which is, your own app, JavaScript, CSS, but also the data that travels from the user. Another thing that we will be looking at is a service worker. And the service worker will actually give us the way to work offline. So this will be at the center of our implementation. And then we will be also looking at how we can customize the user experience for different devices. When we talk about PWAs, most people think about mobile, Android and iOS. But the thing is, you can also use these on desktop. So it also opens the door to use your app in different operative systems. I also like to point tablets, which is kind of a middle category, but these are ways that we can customize the experience for those devices. And we will be looking at how to change that web app manifest to do that. So these are the things that you should satisfy to be considered a PWA. So if you only satisfy one of those, it won't be enough. All right, so let's move to the service worker. And the service worker will allow you to run your app offline. So let's see how that behavior works. And of course, we have a single page application running an Angular app, and that will be our index HTML page. And what will happen is that we have the service worker between the index HTML page and the hosting. And one thing to look at here is that we are actually offline. And imagine the user goes and tries to refresh the page. So goes and refreshes the page, there's no network, and usually you would see that dinosaur. What will happen behind the scenes is that the browser is going to request the application, which will be a JavaScript file or a set of JavaScript files, and some other assets. This could be CSS. I'm using an image on this example, and this will go through the service worker. So this is key because the service worker will look into the cache, and if it finds a match, which are the entries for these requests, it will provide them to the browser. So actually, for the browser, it will look as if you are online. And this is kind of a magic trick. And you would be thinking like, okay, so now we seem to be online, but of course we are still offline. So the way you can emulate this behavior is by installing these assets, and this will be preload on the cache when you install the service worker. So every time you install your app, or when you access your app for the first time, you will install the service worker and all of the assets that you want the browser to have available. So this is quite particular from PWAs, and that means that sometimes you need to load the page at least once so you can actually access this behavior that I showed you. All right. Well, so this is the reaction from people, from web developers. Usually they are like blown away, like, oh my God. I guess most of the times you may be using PWAs without you even knowing. And we have an example there with the Angular website, the Angular docs. They are actually living in a PWA, and you may not know about it. All right. So in my talk, I want to cover this application, which is an online chat room. And if you want to access it and see the code, you can go and follow this URL. And it's using some other technologies, but it's a good example to see how that's working in a real scenario. So this is how it looks. It's going to be using Amplify Framework, and Amplify Framework will provide all of the tools to give you that offline and online synchronization of the data. One thing that we will be using in this app is this chat room, and everyone that logs in can add a message and then share with the other participants. You can see that it resembles WhatsApp application. So everything that you write appears on your left, and everything everybody else writes, it's on the right. Okay, so we are now right on the money. So we have an example. What we are going to do is we're going to go through the steps to make that app into a PWA. So let's do that, and you will see that it's actually not that difficult. So the first thing that we will run is ng-add Angular PWA, and this is a plugin that comes with the Angular CLI, and it will just go ahead and introduce some changes. Of course, it will add the service worker and the application web manifest, and do some changes to the configuration so these are in place. So if we look into these two files, we're going to look into the index.html page changes, and then also in the app module. So if we look into the index.html page, we will see that there are a few changes there. The first one is that we want to have access to the web app manifest. So that's a new link. There's also some information like the theme color. And this is a way to change the user experience. And as I was explaining before, your app, whenever it's a PWA, it has access to different devices. So you need to think about mobile and also desktop here. So this will change that user experience. The other thing that we also need to take into account is that because we are using a service worker now, we need JavaScript. So actually, if the browser, for whatever reason, the user has disabled JavaScript, we need to notify the user that this application won't be available. The next thing is how the service worker is being registered. And another thing we can see here in this code snippet is that it needs to be on production settings. And the reason for that is that because we need the application to be using HTTPS, it actually needs to be in production mode. So you need to build the application in production mode, not only for the service worker to be active, but also to, release it in your hosting. So something that may happen when you are going through examples is that you may be working in development mode, and then you are trying your service worker, but it doesn't matter because your browser won't have it available just because the build is not the proper one. So you want to make sure that you run your build for production. And the way you do that is ngbuild with the production flag. So that will build your application, and that will also, together with the PWA plugin, will make it happen. These are some changes. So when you are doing this together with the PWA plugin, you will see some assets there which are new. And of course, we have the application web manifest. That's a file that will give you these different user experiences for different devices. And then we also have all of the assets and configuration for the service worker. Here, I can point you to a few files. The first one is the safety worker, and this is kind of a hack to be able to avoid some of the loopholes. What has happened in the past is that some people, they they are not familiar with the PWA technology. They will release a service worker, but then they won't allow users to upgrade to new versions. So this safety worker will allow you to always be able to deploy a new version without the user having to do any setup manually. Of course, if you have been using PWAs for a while, you are familiar with this, but this is an improvement on newer versions. Then we have the configuration for the service worker, which is ng service worker. These are the abbreviations. So this is the configuration. The JSON file is just holding the configuration, and then the actual implementation for the service worker, which is ng sw-worker. All right. One thing that I recommend while building your PWA is to use a local server. You still have to build for production, but you don't have to deploy every time. So imagine you are in a rapid, cycle of changes. You don't want to be releasing or deploying, to your hosting provider for every that of those changes. You can run this server locally. And you can achieve that with this HTTP server and also the HTTP server command. What happens is when we build for production, it's going to build the application in the dist folder. So you need to make sure that you are using that folder, the dist folder for your app. Okay. So one of the first things that issues that I found when I was going through this process is that some of the assets were not included. Actually, what happens with the PWA plugin is that it includes everything that is on the dist folder. So that will include all of the assets for your app. But of course, sometimes you have external assets. And in this case, that was a logo, that was an external URL. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. The way the service worker is set up is using this configuration file, which is a JSON file. And this is giving the entry point for our PWA. So this is index HTML for Angular apps. And then we have two different groups of assets. One is the app asset group, and the other one is the assets. So we will look into this, and looking at the asset group for the app, we can find different settings. So the install mode is, in my example, is set to prefetch. And that means that we are going to preload this information, anything that falls, that matches the entries that come after, they will be installed when we load the app for the first time. So that's prefetch. The other setting that you can use here is lazy, and that will be on demand. That will be lazy load. So on the first, when you install the service worker, it won't prefetch that data, but it will wait until the application actually makes the request for that asset. So we pick up prefetch, so that will be that on install, this will be available. And of course, these are all of the files that we need. So we need the index.html page, we need the manifest, all of the resources for our app to function, CSS, JavaScript. And what I did is I added this external URL. So the way you do that is besides the files, these are part of your build, you can also add another section, which is the URLs. And then you can add here, for example, Google Fonts or any other resources that you may have externally. Another option that you can use is you can move your assets to the public folder, and that will be then part of the file. So you have these two options. If you have control, you can copy these assets to your public folder in your build, and they can be on the files section. Or if this is an external resource, you can also use this URL section as I did here. And that will fix the problem. Another thing that I can show you is how the asset section works. Here we are using, on install mode, we are using lazy. And the way to approach this is because we have these different platforms. We have mobile, we have desktop, and we also have web. That's going to be a little bit too heavy. So imagine when we install our PWA on web, we really don't need the assets for mobile or desktop. So this setting, it's going to make it really efficient. So it's only going to install what is needed for that user. The update mode is whenever we do a change on our PWA, it's going to do a prefetch. And because we already went through the install phase, now we already know what platform we are. So if it's web, we are just going to prefetch these assets. We are not going to do lazy load on an update because you're not going to change the platform now. If it's a web browser, it's going to be web. If it's a desktop app, it's going to be a desktop app on an update. So we can go to prefetch. And these are, little improvements. So we are not handling all of the assets, which could be heavy. The way it handles this is it looks into the assets folder and it looks for these extensions. So you can pretty much do whatever you need here. All right, so very, very exciting stuff. We have covered a whole migration. And now we have Chatty, which is the app that I've used for this example. We have a PWA now. So what we have achieved is now I can use this app on web, mobile, and desktop, which is quite incredible. And I can work also offline. One thing that you will see when using this on a mobile is that you will see the icon on your home screen, and this is because of this add to home screen feature. So that will add this as an app. So for the user, actually, it will look like a native app. And then the way it will work is it will open as a standalone application, and it will give you this full experience. So it will just be like another app. You can see on the left is Android, on the right is an iPhone. So we haven't finished yet. I mean, this is a lightning talk, but I'm doing a little bit of a stretch. So it's 99% ready. We can survive offline reload. So now if we go offline and we reload the page, it will still be working. We can also store messages while offline. There are different approaches here. You can use local storage. You can use IndexedDB. It's up to you, but these are available. You can also integrate the changes so you can synchronize the changes when you are back online. So these are all available. But yeah, you can also be synchronizing the data. But the only thing that we are missing is that the user doesn't know if it's offline or online. We need to show the user that information. I mean, of course, you can argue that the user always knows, but you may lose connectivity without knowing. It's not always as obvious as going into the underground that you may lose connectivity. All right, so one way to improve that is by adding this information in your app. And the way I've done it is I've implemented this using a local property that will give you that offline information. So I'm going to add this to my component, to my app component, and I'm going to be offline initially. And one way to get this information is by using this property, which is Navigator Online. And I can also hook into these standard events, HTML events, which is offline and online on the window. And if I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the merge operator from ArcGIS. And every time that the offline and online events trigger, I'm going to set these values, true and false. So if it's offline, I'm going to set a true through this observable. And if it's online, I'm going to use false. I mean, I'm going to use these values because I want to know if the application is offline, so that those values will match that. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for navigation online. This is also another API that I can use. And I'm going to use a simple event that will give me that value. You could use just Navigator Online, but then of course, if you change the status of your online offline, you won't catch that. So you need both. You need to get the value of Navigator Online, but also the changes that may happen along the way. So all of this is going to be one observable using the merge operator. And then I'm going to subscribe to that and just set my property with that value. Okay, so the application can start offline, and then if it goes online, it will go through this event here, and then I will just update that in my observable. All right, so this is how I implemented it on this chatty app. So I just changed the way it looks. So if the user is on the chat, the input changes. It shows like a red, border. And then there's also a message, you are offline, your messages will be shared once you are connected. I mean, you can decide how you want to do this, but I think it's a better user experience if you show that information while the user is using the app. You may lose connectivity for whatever reason. You can go, for example, to a basement, or you can lose connectivity for many reasons that you may not be aware. Okay, so few things to look at. If we want to compare web single page application and PWA, because you can use PWAs in different devices, the line is a little bit fuzzy, but these are, in my opinion, the differences. So PWAs are faster because they can be pre-catch. Of course, they can use offline mode, which web can. They can also work on full screen mode and access to these other platforms like mobile and desktop. Another thing that we haven't covered that much is the native-like features. Some of these are obviously related to offline, but there's some other features you can use. So I'm gonna rate PWAs as slightly better. All right, so well, the sky is the limit. I like to end my slides with this image just shows you like the potential now. You can do like crazy things with PWAs. Well, the thing I want to end this is by giving you this action call. So just go ahead and give it a try. You have seen that it's just running this ng add command, add the PWA plugin, maybe change some configuration. You can also look at the code that I've used. So it should be easy enough for you to go through this. And that's it.